Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, a heated exchange in the Oval Office between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy leaves the White House without signing a critical minerals deal, and a joint news conference is canceled. Iris Tao has the key takeaways from that meeting and how Trump is responding on Truth Social. Democrats blast the Trump administration for its policy on Ukraine after today's exchange between Trump and the Ukrainian president. And European leaders weigh in on the back and forth today. A fallen hostage is honored at his favorite soccer team's stadium. Meanwhile, displaced residents celebrate their return to their homes in northern Israel. Jason Perry reports.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. An Oval Office meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy today ended in arguments and Zelenskyy's departure without signing a critical minerals deal. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. Tell us more about today's meeting.
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. Today's meeting got heated, and Trump, just before leaving the White House for Florida moments ago, told us that the meeting did not go well, especially for Zelenskyy. And Trump went on to tell us that the main deal breaker today was the fact that he wants peace, while he thinks Zelenskyy wants to keep fighting. And I also asked Trump about how long it's going to take for him to invite Zelenskyy back. And Trump told me that while Zelenskyy wants to come back right now, he's not going to send him a second invitation at the moment. Watch.
How long do you think it will take for Zelenskyy to want peace and be invited back to the White House?
Well, he says he wants it now. He wants to come back right now, but I can't do that. I can't.
And the White House confirmed to us that Zelenskyy was told to leave early, of course, not out of his own willingness. And after the meeting got heated, of course, the White House then went on to cancel the joint press conference and a lunch between Trump and Zelenskyy, and telling us that the rare earth mineral deal that was originally supposed to be signed today with Zelenskyy's visit is no longer going to be signed today. And meanwhile, Trump in his remarks also told us that he thinks Zelenskyy, quote, very much overplayed his hand despite not having the cards. Watch.
He doesn't have the cards. When we sign up, he's got all of the cards. That doesn't mean he can fight. He's got to stop the fighting, stop the death. He's losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers. It's time to stop the death.
And of course, now with everything that unfolded today, quite unexpectedly, it leaves the fate of U.S. aid to Ukraine, as well as Zelenskyy's own political career, quite uncertain. Tiff.
And Iris, today was full of unexpected plot twists. How did we get here, and what did they say exactly at that Oval Office meeting?
All right, so let's start with today's meeting first. Today's meeting actually started with some 40 minutes of relatively calm discussions, but it was when Zelenskyy kept emphasizing that Putin might not stick to a ceasefire agreement and his promises, and Trump pushing back, saying that, well, if you keep talking about Putin this way, it's hard to get a deal. And that's also when Vice President Vance interjected, saying that Zelenskyy and Ukraine haven't really shown much gratitude for U.S. aid. Here's how that really tense moment happened. Watch.
Just say thank you.
Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
I can tell you
you're
again,
running low on soldiers.
Listen, please,
you're running
Mr.
low
President.
on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I wanted this.
But ultimately, today's events weren't that unexpected either. We know that actually just last week, President Trump called Zelenskyy a dictator without elections before toning it down earlier this week on Thursday during another foreign visit, saying that he does have respect for Zelenskyy and the Ukrainians fought back quite bravely. And another development that we have seen is that actually Zelenskyy, when the U.S. first sent an envoy to negotiate a rare earth mineral deal with Zelenskyy in Ukraine, Zelenskyy actually turned it down. And that's, of course, before he later expressed willingness to sign it and came all the way to Washington, of course, trying to achieve that deal. But of course, now with Trump saying that, he thinks Zelenskyy doesn't want peace and that he said he, quote, disrespected the USA in its cherished Oval Office. Everything now remains to be seen if Zelenskyy will be invited back one day and if Trump, of course, will say more about his attitude toward potential peace deals between Russia and Ukraine. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. Senator Lindsey Graham suggested that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy either resign or change after the contentious meeting with President Trump at the White House. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on how lawmakers are reacting to this story.
Republican senators had expressed optimism over a potential U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal that was expected to be announced and signed after President Trump's meeting with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
I have never been more proud of the president. I was very proud of J.D. Vance standing up for our country. We want to be helpful. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelenskyy again. He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson posted on social media, thanks to President Trump, the days of America being taken advantage of and disrespected are over. What we witnessed in the Oval Office today was an American president putting America first.
After President Trump and Zelenskyy met at the Oval Office, Democratic lawmakers blasted the White House for their policy positions.
And so what we just witnessed was a meeting in the Oval Office between two cowardly puppets and a hero. And whether you voted for these puppets or not, just as an American, as a fellow American, it's just embarrassing.
We're on the side of the bad guys now. And I just have to say, questioning the legitimacy of the president of Ukraine who was elected, who has been more like Churchill, and I would say Trump has been more like Putin, is extraordinary.
Other Democratic lawmakers warned President Trump not to negotiate a peace with Vladimir Putin.
What Trump doesn't understand, though, is that security must precede mineral extraction and processing, not be a postscript to it.
Vladimir Putin is a murderous dictator. He is a thug who understands one thing, and that is strength. And anytime he thinks he can get the better of Donald Trump, he is going to do that.
Since the war started in 2022, the United States Congress has held 5 votes to appropriate a total of $174 billion to support the Ukrainian war effort. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
European leaders are taking to social media to comment on today's tense exchange between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Let's hear what officials from across the Atlantic are saying.
Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
The meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy caused reactions worldwide. The leader of Germany's Social Democrat Party says that, quote, the behavior of the U.S. government shows once again that Europe must take its future more into its own hands. Europe defending itself is a stance the new U.S. administration supported from the beginning. The Spanish Prime Minister, who's a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, posted a message as well. He says Ukraine, Spain stands with you. The president of the European Commission says, be strong, be brave, be fearless in response to Friday's meeting. And the Prime Minister of Poland says, dear Ukrainian friends, you are not alone. Talks between Washington and Kyiv are expected to continue as the administration aims to end the war in Ukraine.
Residents in Israel continue to honor the memories of deceased hostages as they call for more people to be released from Hamas captivity. Meanwhile, some displaced Israelis have started returning to their homes in northern Israel as the ceasefire with Hezbollah still holds. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
The recently released body of Israeli hostage Sachi Eidan was taken to a soccer stadium in Tel Aviv on Friday before his burial. Eidan was a longtime fan of the Hapoel Tel Aviv soccer team, and players from the team as well as fans took part in a memorial ceremony for him at the stadium.
Sachi was more than a Hapoel team fan. Sachi was and continues to be the sane voice in the room, with an attitude that everything will be fine. And not everything has to be done through battles, and you don't have to fight for everything. The real freedom is to do what you want and not let things affect you.
Eidan's sister also spoke at the memorial.
Today, I say goodbye to my dear brother. I asked him for forgiveness on our behalf, that he was returned in a coffin instead of walking as he was taken.
One hostage who did survive captivity looked much thinner when he was released by Hamas terrorists. In an interview, he explained that another hostage held on to him and didn't want to let go the day he was released. This comes as Israel has expressed willingness to extend the first phase of the ceasefire in order to release more hostages. However, no extension has been announced as of Friday afternoon, and the first phase of the ceasefire is set to expire on Saturday. And Israeli officials have previously said that Israel was ready to resume fighting in the Gaza Strip if the hostages are not returned. Meanwhile, residents in the Gaza Strip are preparing to celebrate Ramadan, the Islamic holy month of fasting, which is expected to begin this weekend. And in another development on Friday, some displaced Israelis celebrated as they returned to their homes in northern Israel near the Lebanese border. Approximately 60,000 people were displaced from northern Israel because of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. But a ceasefire between the two sides appears to be holding. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, the Social Security Administration is one of the latest agencies to announce layoffs, and the CFPB will reportedly cut more staff soon. House Democrats are pushing back. Jason Blair reports from Washington. And Vice President J.D. Vance addresses the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. The annual event comes as Pope Francis continues to battle a serious case of pneumonia. The details of that and more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump is set to sign an executive order to make English the official language of the United States. This marks the first time in U.S. history that an official language will be designated on a national level. The order says the move aims to bring unity to the nation. The order also rescinds a mandate from the Clinton White House that required agencies to provide help to people who don't speak English, although the agencies will still be able to do so. The U.S. Census Bureau says roughly 80% of American households use English as a primary language. Dozens of states have already approved legislation that makes English their official language. The Social Security Administration is gearing up for major workforce reductions, while House Democrats push back on efforts to cut staff at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
In a Thursday statement, the Social Security Administration says that they are making significant reductions to their workforce. They told employees that if they want to voluntarily separate from the agency, they're offering incentives up to $25,000 and making them available until March 14th on a first-come, first-served basis. They also told employees that they might be transferred to what they call, quote, mission-critical positions. And this comes after President Trump signed an executive order on February 11th asking agencies to prepare for big reductions in workforce. And in mid-February, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau laid off about 100 to 200 employees, and there's been talk recently that significantly more layoffs are coming very soon. However, a formal announcement has not been made by the agency. Now, the CFPB has been involved in efforts like reducing junk fees for consumers, and there is a lawsuit out right now against the Trump administration in the effort to reduce this agency. Recently, House Democrats have gotten directly involved in the lawsuit, with Representative Maxine Waters and Hakeem Jeffries, as well as Representative Nancy Pelosi, being involved in this effort. Now, they say that this reduction in the agency causes consumers significant and irreparable harm and is against the law. In a brief filed in the court, the lawmakers say, quote, the agency has delivered more than $21 billion back to consumers who have been defrauded by entities like large banks, loan servicers, debt collectors, and payday lenders. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. today as Pope Francis continues to battle pneumonia. Vance led a prayer for the 88-year-old pontiff's recovery.
And so I would ask all of us if you would join me in this prayer for Pope Francis. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty and generous God, we thank you for your charity. Please grant your mercy upon Pope Francis so he may be restored from sickness and guide us in watchful care. We pray that you bless our Holy Father's doctors, nurses, and medical staff with wisdom and capability so that you may work through them to renew the health of your shepherd through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Earlier today, Pope Francis experienced a sudden episode of respiratory difficulty and was placed on a breathing machine, according to the Vatican. The episode was complicated by vomiting. The Vatican confirmed that Francis remained alert and oriented, but is not yet out of danger. Doctors expect to know more about his condition in the next 24 to 48 hours. Francis has spent 2 weeks in Rome's Gemelli Hospital, where he was admitted with a severe respiratory infection that triggered other complications. New York Mayor Eric Adams' recent motion to dismiss the corruption case against him with prejudice could put the Justice Department in an awkward position, according to a legal expert, especially since the DOJ has already requested that the case be dismissed without prejudice. Our legal correspondent spoke with an attorney to find out what it all means.
The Department of Justice may be facing more challenges after Mayor Eric Adams asked that the corruption case against him be dismissed with prejudice, which means the pending charges could never be reinstated. But the DOJ last week asked the presiding judge to dismiss the charges without prejudice, meaning the charges could be reinstated at a later date. Adams is facing a 5-count indictment which includes accepting bribes going back to 2014. Attorney Gerard Felitti said in a text message that the mayor's recent request adds an interesting twist to the case. He said Adams made the smart play. If he wins, the case is gone forever. If he loses, he'll get to play again depending on what the judge rules. The DOJ's motion, whose terms Adams agreed to, said it was not based on the mayor's guilt or innocence. But continuing these proceedings would interfere with the defendant's ability to govern in New York City, which poses unacceptable threats to public safety, national security, and related federal immigration initiatives and policies. New York prosecutors refused to make the DOJ's request and instead resigned. Last week, the federal judge presiding over the matter delayed the dismissal request, calling it unusual, and sought review by a third-party attorney. Adams has maintained that he did nothing wrong.
I wasn't concerned about being removed because I knew I did nothing wrong. And all of you have to ask yourselves that there was this call from a lot of people who are running for office and some others on the fringes and many who have criticized our policies for years, remove them. Why?
The mayor's attorney on Wednesday argued in a court filing that prosecutors who quit rather than obey the DOJ's directive destroyed whatever presumption of innocence Mayor Adams had left. In a memo to Attorney General Pam Bondi, former interim U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon accused Adams and the DOJ of entering into a quid pro quo agreement. meaning Adams gets off the hook in exchange for Trump carrying out mass deportations in the city. Adams' attorney said a series of leaks, including the memo, violated Adams' ability to receive a fair trial. Meanwhile, Democrats have been pushing New York Governor Kathy Hochul to place limits on Adams' authority. Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said the limitations are appropriate.
It's understandable to me that Governor Hochul is trying to make sure that the city administration is focusing on the people of New York City and nothing else. And to the extent that there are some guardrails and accountability measures that can be put into place to focus the attention of the city government on the people of New York City and not the whims and wishes of the Trump administration, then that certainly is an appropriate step.
The judge is giving the Justice Department until March 7th to oppose Adams' motion. If they don't, it could appear to contradict their own request for a dismissal. Felitti says, "I think the DOJ has to oppose the motion and will argue that there is no prejudice." He doesn't believe Adams will win the motion, but he said if Adams wins the motion or if the case drags on, he'll still help Trump. Adams was vocal on immigration before he was indicted, and if push comes to shove, Trump can pardon him. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, what are the key takeaways from the tense meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy? And can the two sides come to an agreement on the critical minerals deal? A political strategist and foreign affairs analyst joins us to discuss after the break. Leaders of the U.S. and Ukraine meeting to sign a deal over Ukraine's critical minerals, but there was a heated exchange instead. The signing of the deal is off for now, but if some form of a deal is made, could this provide the U.S. with a strategic advantage over China by gaining more access to these elements? An NTD data report sheds some light on this.
This is not the first roadblock that this would-be deal between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy has met. Some first drafts were thrown out as well. But keep in mind, there's no security guarantee in this would-be deal. Now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that there is an implied economic security guarantee. Think about it. If the United States has a lot of assets mining some of these minerals, then they're invested in a strong Ukrainian economy, thus more security for the Ukrainian people. But now let's look at this would-be reconstruction plan. That's the Reconstruction Investment Fund. It's funded entirely by Ukraine. 50%, that's half of Ukraine's natural resource revenue, would go to funding the fund. And that's 0 pennies that the United States is going to pay. So that's clearly all on Ukraine at this point. Now, what does Ukraine have? It has critical minerals. What you're looking at right here are rare earths that are said by some to be under the ground in Ukraine. Part of those resources include natural gas and even oil and other revenues, say, from ports, right, for example. But now let's get into some of the numbers. Let's look at Ukraine's share of these critical minerals in the whole world supply. I mean, they have not just 1, but 2, 5% of the entire world's critical minerals resources. So a lot of them. And again, that's according to the United Nations, right? So it's really a question now as to whether or not Ukraine, if these minerals that are there are even economically viable to mine. But regardless, they are there, right? So now these are the types of critical minerals that Ukraine has. 22 of the 34 types of critical minerals defined by the European Union, says the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine, are found in Ukraine. Let's look at some of the applications for these critical minerals. Right here, you can clearly see there are military applications, right? You're just looking at a Blackbird there. So when you look at what's underground in Ukraine and what can that do for a modern society? Well, you got titanium. Again, that's for that Blackbird long-range reconnaissance aircraft, and then lithium batteries for your EVs, gallium, those are semiconductors. You got to have microchips, graphite used in the production of nuclear energy, beryllium for nuclear weapons, and rare earths for things like, say, for example, windmills and other missile systems and so forth, right? So now, at the same time, the demand for these critical minerals, here lithium is just one example, is going up. These are just estimates past 2021, according to Goldman Sachs research. But look at that, it's almost doubling from 25 to 2030, right? 2025 to 2030. So you talk about, okay, well, what does lithium do? Again, that's the batteries, right? Well, look about, you talk about cobalt and so forth, right? I mean, this demand is going up. So you can see a modern society has to have that. Cobalt, I mean, this is for your airbags, other chemical applications. And then you look at nickel as well. You put this nickel in your armor plating. Again, that demand is rising. Rare earths, actually, the demand isn't rising quite that much, maybe 10, 20% increase, but it's still going up according to Goldman Sachs, right? Now, but when you add all these up, you see clearly that these critical minerals are going to be much more sought after as time goes on. Okay, so now what about the rare earths? Who has them? I mean, look at first of all, titanium is a very important metal. It's not necessarily a rare earth, but it is a critical mineral, and Ukraine has 7% of the world's supply. I mean, that's the largest reserve of titanium in all of Europe, right? And furthermore, the gallium production, Ukraine is the 5th out of the entire world in terms of gallium production. The United States, it doesn't even produce any. It has to import all of it. So, but you ask, well, wait, there are only 4 countries up there. You said it was the 5th. Well, look at this. China is by far and away the world's largest producer of gallium. You're talking, 500,000, a million pounds of this stuff coming out of China, right? And that's just, Ukraine's just a sliver. But again, the United States has to import all of it, and that's 25% that they're importing from China. And here's the rest of the world to give you a comparison. So of all the countries, I mean, China is clearly dominating that market, which is very important, right? And now you talk about rare earths. Well, look at this. Ukraine doesn't have any. That's 0% of the rare earth reserves, the rare earth element reserves. Now, that just means they have none in the ground. And that's according to the Energy Innovation Policy and Technology, LLC. You ask, wait a minute, but you just said that we just found out that Ukraine has all these rare earths that we're talking about. No, it depends on who you ask, because they just don't know what's underground. I mean, for example, the Ukrainian Geologic Survey says they do have it, but this LLC says they actually don't. Okay, and they say, well, okay, if Ukraine doesn't have it, then, well, who does have it? Well, you might have guessed. It's China. They have a ton of, they have 40 million tons of these rare earth reserves sitting underground. Again, reserves are not deposits. You can actually mine reserves. Deposits, it's, you just don't know, right? So now these rare earth production, you might have guessed, Ukraine has 0. I mean, if they have no reserves, they have no production of these rare earths. But then again, China is just absolutely dominating this. 300,000 tons of these rare earths. So the United States needs to find a way to secure its supply chain. So could the United States gain an advantage if it were to get some of these rare earths from places like Ukraine? Well, it's not quite clear because they don't really have any rare earth production. The other critical minerals, that's a different story. But now here, look at this. You talk about the mining of China's share of the global critical minerals, right? It's not mining that much nickel and cobalt, just, under 10%, but it's got a quarter of the lithium mining in the entire world. And then over 60% of the rare earth mining takes place in China. But here's the big story. Talk about supply chains, right? You got to process these materials. So over 60% nickel, cobalt, lithium, or just about 60% of the processing is done in China. But then look at this, 90% of the processing of rare earths takes place in China. So even if the United States were able to get some of this from Ukraine, you still have to send it all through China to get it processed. But there's another X factor here in terms of how this deal could possibly help benefit the United States, and that's Russia. Right, so the Ukrainian mineral deposits, some of them are under Russian control. We just showed a few of them here, titanium, rare earths. Again, we just said there weren't any rare earths, but some say there are, according to the Institute of Study of War. But you see, these are the front lines right here. Russia controls this area. So if you see that there are clearly some deposits. I mean, talking rare earth, you have some lithium deposits there. It could be up to $12 trillion worth of critical minerals deposits in Ukraine, but Russia may control about half of them. So it's still unclear as to how much of the United States could actually mine these if the deal were to go through. And we're going to have to see how this develops because, again, it's still in its very early stages. Back to you.
Joining us now to discuss the tense meeting today between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is political strategist Gerard Filitti. He's also a foreign affairs analyst and attorney specializing in international law. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, today's meeting ended without a deal, with President Trump calling Zelenskyy disrespectful and reiterating that Ukraine has no cards in peace negotiations. What's your takeaway from today's meeting?
Well, today's meeting, as it was publicized, is something I think many Americans have not seen before. This was unprecedented, and especially when you hear that the Trump administration asked Zelenskyy to leave the White House after that confrontation. What we saw was an inability by President Zelenskyy to understand that he needs to compromise. The fact that he was discussing no compromises while Trump was repeatedly talking about the need to find us to solve the problem, to be a mediator, shows that this is not something that can happen at this time. Zelenskyy still needs to come to the table, but that's not what happened today. So we don't have that mineral deal. We don't have that security guarantee of any kind. We have the war continuing, and Zelenskyy really has a lot of ground to make up.
Now, Zelenskyy was on Fox News just moments ago. He said he is grateful to Trump, but won't apologize. Do you think this meeting will change the way the American people view Zelenskyy?
I think that the American people, when they voted for Donald Trump, saw that Ukraine is a country that was attacked by Russia, that was invaded by Russia in an unjust war of aggression, but that this war needs to end. As much as we stand with Ukraine, as much as we have supported them for the last 3 years, Americans want this war to end. And seeing Zelenskyy refuse to bow to reason, to logic, to the understanding that there needs to be compromise and a deal reached, I think Americans will be disappointed, and they will be more than ever pushing for an end to supporting Ukraine if Ukraine is not willing to back down and come to the table for peace.
And on the other hand, how do you think people in Ukraine will respond to today's meeting?
I think people in Ukraine support President Zelenskyy. I think Zelenskyy was speaking from the heart. This is a country that's been at war in their backyards, affecting their lives daily for 3 years now. So there is an understandable sense of frustration that the world is not coming more to their aid, that the world, including America, is not doing more to help them beat Russia, not just come to a stalemate or a peace. So I think right now the Ukrainian people are very much in Zelensky's corner, backing him for laying down the law from Ukraine's perspective. But at the same time, they also, I think, will have this frustration that the war cannot go on indefinitely. Ukraine is losing a lot of people are dying, a lot of people are being injured, and everyone wants this war to end. So with time, I think this does not serve Zelenskyy well, even in Ukraine.
Now, in terms of the critical minerals deal, do you think the two sides can still come to an agreement on that?
I think they can. The fundamental misunderstanding is what constitutes a security guarantee. Now, for Zelenskyy and Ukraine, they want military guarantees. They want boots on the ground. They want European or American peacekeepers to make sure in Ukraine that there is not another Russian invasion or incursion. That's not going to happen. The reason that's not going to happen is Russia would never enter into a peace agreement that had that provision. It's frankly unrealistic. The security guarantee is the mineral deal. It's the economic development. It's America's commitment, presence on the ground in economic terms, in people exploiting resources and doing business. That guarantees peace and stability more than a military can. So once the Ukrainian people understand that and Zelenskyy comes to the table, I think we will see this deal.
And Gerard, how important would this deal be for U.S. interests?
It's very important for U.S. interests. I think it's a way not just to rebuild Ukraine with this investment fund, but it's a way to regain some of the money, some of the treasure that we have spent helping Ukraine in these last 3 years. Now, granted, a third of what we've sent to Ukraine has come back to the United States in the form of arms purchases and supplies purchases, but Americans will likely see a lot more benefit from this deal with money flowing into the Treasury over the next 5 to 10 years than has been laid out. So it's a very good deal economically for Americans.
And President Trump posted on Truth Social after the meeting saying, quote, "I have determined that President Zelenskyy is not ready for peace if America is involved because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage. I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America and its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace." How do you read Trump's statement here?
I read this as a very accurate reflection of what happened. The read of the room was that President Zelenskyy feels that he has more to gain by continuing getting support from the West than by sitting down to negotiate an end to the war. And we have to remember the Biden administration did him no favors. We gave him just enough arms and weapons to stay in the fight, but not enough to actually win or make significant progress. So this gave him the illusion that America would continue supporting him in the fight, when in reality, there needs to come an end to this war. So until Zelenskyy realizes that there needs to be compromise, that there needs to be an end to this, we're likely to continue seeing this war. But I think everyone is getting tired of the vast devastation, the human tragedy that's occurring, and Zelenskyy will be back and this deal will be negotiated.
On that note, what is next for U.S.-Ukraine relations? Are things irreparable at this point, or what needs to happen?
I don't think they're irreparable. I think it's a good sign that Zelenskyy did not just fly home, that he did go on Bret Baier and have that conversation with him. I think we will see over this evening and tomorrow more attempts to kind of walk back his comments, still standing by them to the extent that Russia was the aggressor, but showing more of a willingness, more of a contrition and understanding that he does eventually want to come back to the table. I think the relationship is not harmed, but Zelenskyy has a lot of damage control to do in the next few days.
And after Zelenskyy left the White House, many European leaders sent out messages supporting Ukraine. Do you think Zelenskyy's brassness may have had something to do with European leaders who also want to say in the peace talks?
In part it does, but Europe also has very different concerns than the United States. They've dealt with Russian aggression after World War II. They had the Iron Curtain descend upon them. Just like communist China, the people in Europe know the experience, knows what it means to live under a totalitarian regime. So there's much more affinity for Europe to keep Ukraine in the fight and to stop Russia from advancing. In America, for Donald Trump, for us, it's more of an economic perspective. It's more of a general humanitarian stance. For Europeans, it's much more personal, and there's much more support for Zelenskyy in that regard.
Gerard Filitti, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
With Zelenskyy facing political considerations at home, can he afford to return empty-handed? Tune into NTD's Capital Report at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to further break down the meeting between the two leaders and what's expected to come. And do Americans have faith in President Trump's promise to end the Russia-Ukraine war? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
Zelenskyy is in Washington today meeting with President Trump. So what do you think the significance of this meeting is?
Well, I think getting the war to end is primary one.
It's significant, both to the positive and the negative. While some of the things that Trump is doing are very good, I think that what he's doing with the Ukraine and trying to gain mineral rights and walking away from the defense of the Ukraine and allying with Russia, I think that is a mistake.
I can only hope that Zelenskyy goes home happy, because right now I don't think he's going to go home happy.
Zelenskyy wants to make sure that the funding continues from the United States to support his war effort with Russia, and I think that's his main concern.
So many people lost their lives over this, and it's going to be a little give and take on both sides, but if they could come down with a deal and keep a lot of people safe.
Are you confident that Trump is going to eventually break a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia?
If he does, I think it'll be temporary. My view is that Russia has a legacy view of Ukraine and Eastern Europe in general that will not fit with any peace deal.
It definitely will come through. Trump's the man. President Trump's the man. USA, all the way.
Obviously, I hope that that we do eventually get peace, or the Ukrainians get peace. But so I would say probably, but I just don't think it's going to be in Ukraine's favor in any way.
For sure. And how confident are you in this administration's ability to handle this war?
50%.
I think that he expects something in return, unlike other presidents, and that's where I worry that, unless Zelenskyy is willing to bow to that, he's not going to get what he wants.
I'm hopeful because he apparently has a better relationship with Putin than Biden. I don't think made much of an attempt to make any conversation with him at all.
They're the one and only. The previous administration had no clue on anything. Both sides just have to talk and work things out and just find an amicable split. And, somebody's going to have to give up some territory. And it's just going to have to, enough is enough. Let's get this done and stop the killing.
Coming up, new details are emerging about the deaths of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Authorities are investigating the possibility of carbon monoxide exposure, along with medications found at the scene. Christina Corona reports. And in baseball, Dodgers star Shohei Ohtani will finally make his spring training debut today, but will he get to pitch? Dave Martin joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Santa Fe officials are providing new details about the suspicious deaths of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Their bodies were found alongside their dog earlier this week. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Santa Fe officials are releasing more details on the suspicious deaths of actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa.
Their bodies, along with their dog, were found on Wednesday. Sheriff Adon Mendoza says they may have been dead for as long as 2 weeks, and it's unclear whether they died at the same time. Mendoza added they're working with the medical examiner to establish a timeline. On Friday, the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office released a search warrant inventory detailing items collected from Hackman and his wife's home following their deaths.
From this search warrant, there were 2 green in color cell phones, 2 bottles of medication, 1 bottle of over-the-counter Tylenol, my request medical records, and a 2025 monthly planner calendar.
The search revealed an open orange prescription bottle with pills scattered on the countertop near Arakawa. Sheriff Mendoza confirmed the medications are being closely examined. The search also revealed that Arakawa's body was discovered in a decomposed state with facial bloating and mummification of her hands and feet. Hackman was found with similar signs of decomposition. Officials said there were no signs of external trauma and no active gas leak was found. Mendoza spoke with Dr. Heather Jarrell, the pathologist from the New Mexico Office of the Medical Investigator, advising that several tests were to be expedited.
She revealed to me the following information. Both individuals tested negative for carbon monoxide. An initial interrogation was conducted of Mr. Hackman's pacemaker. This revealed that his last event was recorded on February 17th, 2025. I was advised that a more thorough investigation will be completed.
The home's size made the investigation difficult, but several unsecured doors were discovered. Mendoza also said the Santa Fe Animal Control Division worked with family to ensure the safety of the 2 surviving dogs. The Santa Fe Film Commissioner also shared her thoughts, highlighting the couple's deep connection to the community.
But beyond Hollywood, Gene and Betsy were our neighbors who embraced the Santa Fe lifestyle and embraced Santa Fe as their home. Their kindness, generosity, and love for this city made them more than just icons, but they were a part of our family.
Autopsies have been completed, but the cause of death is still unknown. Toxicology tests are being done, but the results may take up to 3 months. Christina Corona, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, but let's start in the NBA as the Philadelphia 76ers announced that former MVP Joel Embiid will miss the rest of the season with a lingering knee injury. Does his absence affect the playoff race?
I mean, somewhat. The Sixers, they're not in playoff position right now. Actually, far from it. They're 20-38. That's the 6th worst record in the NBA. And this is a team that was supposed to at least compete for winning the Eastern Conference. I mean, they signed Paul George to a big contract, but him with Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. But those 3 All-Stars, they've only played 15 games together out of a possible 58. Part of that problem is that Embiid has only played 19 games himself because of this lingering injury. Now, certainly if Embiid's knee allowed him to play down the stretch, maybe they could wreck some other teams' chances of making the playoffs. But for them, I mean, they'd almost have to run the table to get in. Plus, their first-round pick next year belongs to Oklahoma City if it's outside the top 6. Right now, they have the 6th worst record in the league, so they are in line for that number 6 pick. Now, I'm not saying that factors in here, but there's no sense in playing him if you're not going to make the playoffs, which really don't have much of a chance. So the short answer is no, it doesn't.
Well, elsewhere in the league, Warrior Steph Curry had quite a game last night, scoring 56 points in a win over the Magic. Where does that rank for him in terms of highest scoring games?
It is 6 off his career high. He hit 62 actually a few years ago. The Warriors needed all of his 56 points last night too. They trailed by 17 late in the first half. That's when Curry hit a half-court shot just before halftime to cut it to 14. And then he scored 22 points in the first 9 minutes of the third quarter. That's when the Warriors made their run, took the lead. This was his 14th career 50-point game. That is the 7th most all-time. He was very efficient too. He had 16 out of 25 shots, all 12 of his free throws. He also had 12 three-pointers on the day. That's the most by anyone this season. As for the Warriors, they're now 7-1 since they traded for Jimmy Butler. I think his presence really helps keep teams honest, their defense anyway. They can't just focus on Curry. But anyway, quite a performance last night.
Well, looking now at baseball news, reigning MVP Shohei Ohtani is set to make his big spring debut tonight against his former team, the Angels. Big question, will he pitch?
He will not pitch tonight. I know it's been so long. It's been a year and a half since he last pitched. That was when he was part of the Angels club. Now, since then, he's had elbow surgery. He's been relegated to hitting only. Amazingly, he was the best hitter in the league last year. The first ever member of the 50 homers, 50 steals club, and he was the first ever designated hitter to win MVP. But he injured his non-pitching shoulder in the World Series then. It looks like he's past that injury. That's why they're letting him hit tonight, though. As for pitching, I think the last thing they want to do is rush him back to the mound, especially with the deep staff they have right now. They signed Blake Snell in the offseason. They signed Roki Sasaki. So they've got plenty of options there. I don't think we'll see Ohtani until well past the season starts, maybe sometime in May.
Shifting gears to college basketball, the NCAA said they have not finalized plans to expand the number of teams in the NCAA tournament. What kind of expansion was being discussed?
It wasn't huge. It was going from 68 to either 72 or possibly 76 teams. Now, NCAA Senior Vice President Dan Gavitt said they have not voted on it. He does not expect a vote in the near future. Personally, I don't think it's a good idea to expand this tournament even further. I don't like that they went from 64 to 68 teams a few years ago. I mean, with 64, each team has to win 6 games to win the title. With 68, you've got 4 of them that possibly have to win 7 to get there. And it's not like this is the lowest 4 seeded teams either, so it doesn't really make sense to most people. But I think the biggest thing is it's watering down the standards for qualifying. There's 355 Division I teams in college basketball, so approximately 1 in 5 gets in. Now, if you compare that to football, it's a 12-team playoff. There's 133 programs. So it's less than 1 in 10. It's a much higher standard. So personally, I'm glad to see it stay. I have a feeling, though, eventually they're going to expand this tournament.
Well, Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.